8static, definitely a Blip Festival, but this is the first time I've done something that's kind of a little bit more broad. So I'd appreciate it if you have any questions that, you just ask them during the presentation is fine, or at the end, really whenever you want. And we can kind of keep it like conversational, because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to mention here, I know a lot about, and if I'm gauging that there's not a lot of interest, I can move on. But if there's something you have a question about, just let me know. And I have my contact information at the end as well if you're curious. So, yeah, we're going to get started. So one thing you might see a lot on chip music flyers if you've been to shows or you see them online, you see things that say like visuals by, right? Well, if you go to like a DJ party or somewhere else, you might see like VJ so-and-so, or you might see people say that, oh yeah, live visuals are being done by, Pixel Seed, or VJing is done by Chica. So the question is like, what's the real difference here, and why do people use different terms like this? And a lot of people, including myself, like to use live visuals as opposed to VJ, and that really just comes when you think of like the root of the word here. When you think about VJ, you think about video jockey, right? Like disc jockey for DJ. The whole idea is that a lot of people that use that VJ term are usually people that are using video clips. So they might be using software like Modulate or VDMX or other things. They have pre-rendered clips that they're then playing, much like a DJ plays records and mixes them, adds effects, things like that. But the heart of it is that it's mostly static. So we're talking about live visuals. We're talking about doing things that are dynamic, they're live, it's software usually that you have written yourself, or software that other people have written that you're using, and you're hitting buttons in time with music to change things. So tonight, if you see Pixel Seeds set up, or if you look at most chip visualists, you're going to notice that they're not just back there kind of hitting buttons and letting clips run. It's a combination of changing parameters in real time to match the music, and that's really important. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the distinction really between live visuals and something like VJing. So I just want to kind of clear that up, because a lot of people use this interchangeably. I don't really care, but when we talk about live, that's really what we mean. And live setup is the next thing I'm going to talk about here. And I have some pictures to show a lot of this stuff, because I know if you've never really looked at this stuff before, it's probably things you might not be familiar with. So the first thing you're going to need is a mixer, and that's really just to composite multiple inputs. So again, to make that kind of connection to DJ, if DJs have a mixer between two turntables or two CDs or laptops, whatever, to mix different audio channels. It's the same thing. You need some type of mixer to composite multiple inputs. There are VJs that work with just like A/B switches, but most people have mixers. One of them is Adderall V4. Pixel Seed's using that tonight. You can check it out. And that's kind of like the industry standard. They also make a V8, and that takes VGA, but this mostly takes composite input. So we'll talk about input styles in a minute. The Chord Cross 4 is no longer made, but you can grab that as well. And monitor, and again we'll have pictures in a moment. Monitor is something you need to preview a single channel, maybe multiple channels. And again, it's the same thing where if you have headphones, if you're a DJ, you're listening to that other track before you mix it in. And if you're doing visuals, you need a screen to preview what's happening before you send that out to the larger projection screen. And you want one that is, I put size on there without having any indication, small or large. Large is better because then you can see more what's happening. But if you know your software well, it's really only for just a quick check. Small is better because usually when you're doing live visuals, you have a lot of gear. You want something rugged and hopefully something in color. So this is a picture of the Adderall V4, and if you take a look, you can see there's that T-bar, which can also be arranged sideways to be more like a crossfader, and there's effects on each side. The effects labels are kind of stupid because you can actually program those 4 keys on either side to have any effects that you want, well, any effects that they offer. And we'll talk about that later too, about when you're writing your own software or doing live visuals, how do you decide what effects you want to use and versus in your software versus on hardware. As you see in the upper left here, there's 4 inputs. Oh man, sorry about that. Right here, and those 4 inputs are yellow composite wires, so or RCA. So this is only standard definition, but this is kind of like the de facto mixer. And there's also S-video inputs. You can also do S-video or RCA out. But again, this, even as simple as it looks, standard definition, these are still probably going to run you well over $1,000 at this point. I'm not sure how much they are, maybe like $1,500. But so it's a bit of an investment, which is why I'm going to be showing some demos today with some software that I wrote to be able, that I eventually will release. I'm going to say eventually, not like I'm holding it captive for any reason, I was lazy. But hopefully we'll release it very soon that allows you to kind of do some things like this, but in software, which is useful for presentations like this when you don't have a lot of equipment. And, or you're lending it to your friends. So, Rochester Chip's happening tonight, and Batsley Adams is using my mixer. So. And then this is a monitor, right? And again, monitor, you see it's pretty simple, 2 wires, probably power and video in, and you can get monitors like this on like Deal Extreme or any of those like cheap import sites that sell like electronics gear that ships from Hong Kong for like $10. And this is probably about 40 bucks, you can get them there. And again, you want something that's color, so you're able to preview what's happening before you send it out. So these are kind of the main components. You know, you need a mixer, you need a monitor to preview what you're doing, but you're also going to need shit to go into that, right? And that's where you have like a Nintendo or a computer or whatever you use. I do a lot of visuals using Nintendos mostly, but you know, you can use really whatever you want. Now, that's really the next step here, which is live setup, right? So now we know we need a monitor and a mixer. The other components really that come in here are hardware, right? And if you see chip musicians that use Game Boys, of course, one of the problems is older parts, maintenance, things that may break, and it's not always easy to get those things fixed. It's the same thing with consoles to do live video with. But unfortunately, unlike Game Boys, most of the live consoles that you're going to be, live visual consoles are going to be like Nintendos, people use Super Nintendos, Commodore 64, and if none of these ring a bell, they're much larger than a Game Boy. So these things have a lot more, they're a lot harder to transport, they can get broken a lot easier, but you know, the good thing is if you take care of them well, they're going to last a long time. Computers can be used as well, but you can have concerns with outputs. For instance, this Mac only does, you know, VGA out, and without a scan converter, which I'll show in a moment, you can't have this go into Edirol V4 video mixer. They just released a new, Edirol just released a new video mixer that takes HDMI in and out, but it's $5 grand. So as you go up in higher definition, everything increases, you know, with costs. So again, computers, you have output concerns, trying to figure out how to get stuff into a mixer can be tough, which is why a lot of computer VJs use software that does the mixing on the computer. And I'll show you a demo of something like that in a bit. Projectors, I have some diagrams here. This is one of the most confusing things, especially now that projectors are really cheap. You can get a ton of different types of projectors, right? We have this small one sitting right here, this Epson. We brought this maybe 2 years ago for 8static after that Kickstarter. That's longer, I guess. And it's still pretty great. It's like 2,000 lumens. It's pretty bright here, you can see. It's only 800 by 600. So again, resolution of cheaper projectors tends to be smaller. You want to spend more money on an HD projector, that's fine. But if you're doing visuals on a Nintendo or a Commodore, you're looking at resolutions of like 256 pixels by 240. You know, your phone has a higher resolution than that, right? So you don't need a really high-res projector unless you're doing things like presentations. But you just need something that's really bright. And again, resolution is one thing you want to think of. Brightness and throw. And I have some diagrams really to talk about throw, because that's one thing that can be really confusing if you're going to start doing visuals and you want to buy your projector. And most of the time it sucks because they always have audio equipment, but they never really have projectors when you go places. It's lucky that philaMOCA has that, and more you might have it, but I've been to way too many gigs where you do it at a bar and they're like, yeah, we have a projector, and then we go there and there's like a wire that's hot glued into it that's been there because it fell down a few times and nothing works. And people are like, oh, the projector worked, but it only plays DVDs. Or, you know, you hear a lot of, people don't really understand projectors like they understand audio, so it can be a really good idea to buy your own. And one of the things you want to think of, again, brightness is pretty easy to figure out, but throw is something you want to think of. So again, these are just some common inputs before we get to to talk about projectors. You know, those rounded wires are composite, VGA. You know, so composite wire is what you're going to see on most video mixers. That HDMI wire on the end, that black one, and the blue one are VGA. Most of the time you're going to need something like this, the scan converter, to be able to plug in a HDMI or a VGA video source and get out composite that you see above, but those will still run you like $100. So if you want to do that, you didn't want to be aware. So projectors, right? this is a regular looking projector, just like the one we have here. And throw, when we talk about throw here, this is a thing from Wikipedia. We're talking about, yeah, the width and height of the screen based on the distance to the screen. So if you are close, obviously it is smaller, and if you're far away, it is larger. But that's not standard for all projectors. And some projectors have zooms and some don't. And that's one thing you want to keep in mind as well, that if you have a projector that has a zoom, then you can kind of fudge it. But some of the zooms don't really look that good and affect the overall picture quality. So a lot of the time what you have is, well, if I want this bigger, I just need to get it farther away. And if I want this picture smaller, I have to get it closer. And that sounds great, but look, if you look at this venue tonight, our projector is right back here that we're using above the VJ area, and this screen is here. You can't really put a ladder in the middle of the audience with a projector on top of it. So you want to make sure you know going in if your projector is going to work for a given situation, and that's where throw comes in. And these are two examples of short throw projectors, which are both really funny looking. The top one being a modern kind of short throw that just has a really like cracked out looking eyeball bulb, and the bottom one, which is it has like you can see there's a mirror, and the projector literally hits the mirror, as you can see. It looks like a really bad Photoshop job, but that's what they look like. It hits the mirror and then bounces back. Now these, as you could imagine, are even less, you can configure them even less because of the way the bulbs are set up. And here's this is a good chart, even though it's low res. So you can see on the top there is one of those mirrored type projectors, and you can get that really close to the wall and have the same throw as a regular short throw projector that's above that dude's head. And even that one over here is another short throw one. And the reason I like this diagram is it shows you, if you're going to be setting up, with a short throw projector, you're going to have to be relatively close. It also shows another thing. If you look at that one that's on the right that says CPX1, you'll notice that this projector the light doesn't come out like evenly. It doesn't just come out like a perfect cone or anything. There's one part of the projector it's always going to slope down more, and the other one's going to be more of a straight line. So if you're setting up a projector, sometimes if you have it above, you have to flip it upside down. So the reason it all sounds very boring, but if you get into VJing, these are things that are going to drive you insane about your setup, and you really need to be aware of. The type of projector setup is key. It's much easier, like I said, going to a bar where they already have speakers. But if you have to set your own projector up, you need to make sure it's going to work. So I guess to sum up this few minutes of talking about this, you just want to make sure that you visit the venue ahead of time, or can do the calculations necessary to figure out the throw distance for your projector when setting up in a bar or a club. I think there was one thing I didn't talk about, which is surface. If anybody has any questions about projection surfaces later, we can talk about that, but we can move on from that for now. So this is an example setup, and this is a picture taken during the daytime a couple years ago, quite a few years ago. And you can see this is what setup I have with two Nintendos, and it's pretty easy to see one on either side. And the monitor is that little color monitor right in the back near the cursor, and that's what I use to preview either input. And this is way back when I had to still solder my cartridges together, so that's why you have these gutted looking Nintendo cartridges around. But this is an example setup that you might see if somebody that's using classic hardware to do visuals. So each of these Nintendos is powered on and plugged in to the mixer right here. This is the same mixer that I showed earlier in that diagram right here. And both of those inputs go in, and then this little T-bar right here is now sideways. It's more like a crossfader. And that's going to be used to mix between those two inputs. And I'll talk about the different way of mixing these inputs, because if you've never done video mixing before, it's a lot different than audio, right? Or audio, there's different ways to mix audio as well, but the idea is that, as one channel goes out, the other one comes in, like on a DJ mixer with a crossfader. It's a little more complicated with video, because there's a lot of different ways you can composite multiple signals. But this is, this is a similar setup, and I know a lot of other VJs that use hardware have stuff like this. You can check Pixel Seed stuff in the back. But this is kind of what you're going to be working with. I use 3 Nintendos usually. This is just for a demo during the day. But I usually take out 3 Nintendos, and the reason you have 3 might sound excessive, because you can only mix 2 inputs. But if you always want 2 inputs mixed together at one time, you need a 3rd input on the ready, so you can load new software into that, so you can switch that one in and then load software on another one. So again, it's this kind of game where you're playing when you're doing live mixing, where you have two inputs showing at one time, but you're always readying the next thing that's going to be coming in. Just like when you see a DJ play, they're always listening to the next track in their headphones coming up before you hear it. So there's always that element of preparation that's required when doing live video with multiple inputs like this. But this is kind of an example setup. So this is the most important slide. And like I said, before I've done talks about doing visuals, and I've always talked about like my software or how you can use it, and there have always been tutorials like that, but what I haven't really gotten into much is the specifics of these. I'm going to go show some examples now in some software that I put together specifically for this, so you can check it out, and I'm going to show some clips, or maybe one clip of something I did online before, and that way you can see, kind of what it looks like behind the scenes and what it looks like out there. But these, I think, are things that are super important to think about when you're performing live. And this might sound, maybe I just sound old and kind of jaded when I say this, but I always feel that people think they can get into video because it's easier than getting into audio. And they're like, oh yeah, well fuck it, if I mess up on stage with music, people are going to know. But if I'm doing video, nobody's really going to notice because they're listening to a musician anyway. That's a really shitty way to go in thinking about it. But I think people do that, and I think it shows, all right? So what I'm saying is, the number one thing you want to do is keep the musician in mind. And I don't really have any pictures or diagrams or anything to show you for this, but if you're doing, I could pull up, I could make some enemies, but I don't want to do that. So what I mean here is that you remember you're performing with a musician. It's not like you versus that musician. And you see that a lot, right? It's like, well, this guy's up there dancing around and doing crazy stuff, so I'm going to put up some crazy clips there. Everybody's going to notice me. And that's probably not always going to be the best thing. The best VJ performances that I see, or live visual performances that I see, are the ones where it looks like everything was planned out ahead of time. Sometimes it is planned out ahead of time, sometimes it's not, but when it all works together, that's really key. And I'm going to talk about ways, when we get to beat matching and counting, I'll let you hear an example of some music and just kind of give you a kind of look into what I would recommend doing if you're thinking of doing this. Yeah, so that's really the most important thing, is to keep the musician in mind. And the last thing on here, beat matching and counting, is probably the second most important thing here, which is, if remember, you're doing visuals. You're not doing free-form visuals for people to watch, right? You're performing with a musician, so you want to make sure that you understand the type of music that they're playing. And if you know a little bit about song structure, and you can and you have a little bit of rhythm, not a lot, and you can count. That sounds sad, but you know what I mean. If you can count and you can tell what's going on in time, you can anticipate changes in the music, and you can make your visuals match those changes, and when they come, it's better for the person that's out there in the audience watching. Because if you see something coming, for instance, I'll show some things, just complete audio examples, but for example, Cheap Dinosaurs has played here many times. I've done visuals to him a lot, and Bucky's an amazing drummer, and when I see him put his hands up, then I know that something's, if it's a song I don't know, when he puts his hands up, I know they're going to come down in a moment, and when they are, there's going to be a change in the music somehow. And that's when I'm going to get ready to change the effect, change the color, do something to synchronize the drums crashing with the video on the screen. And it might sound really inattentive, but the idea is that people out there might not notice your visuals, but they may not even notice that part of the song, but if they're watching, they're probably going to notice some change, feeling of that thing happening together. And I think that's a really important part of doing live visuals, is synchronizing the kind of audio-visual experience for for you watching. And again, that's why keeping the musician in mind and counting and paying attention to the people performing is extremely important. So, how can you do all that shit? Well, those are the next 3 points in the middle. Mixing and chroma keying, we're going to talk about how you can get your signals put together. I'll show some live examples. Effects, and again, the big thing here is, what effects are you going to write in your software, or what effects are available in your software, versus effects that you get kind of for free on hardware. And the last thing is layering and composition. I'll give some hints on, just how to put things together. I mean, of course, a lot of this is all my opinion, But one of the reasons I know some of it is true is because when Alex Bond, if you know Alex Bond, Enzo, when he got started doing visuals, I went through a lot of the shit with him, and now he's like 10 times better than I am. So I at least give good advice. So hold on one second. All right. So this is a still that from a piece of software that I wrote. It's going to be a dramatic pause. I just need to drink something. I mean, like, now look at that for a minute. I didn't need to pause there. I don't know what else to do. So this is a still from a piece of software that I usually use as a background image. And I'll talk about that when we talk about layering. When I say image, I usually have one layer on top of the other. When I write some software, I think like, oh, this is going to be perfect background software, or this will be perfect foreground software. And I'll show you some live examples of that in a second. This is a background, what I consider something for the background. This is a still of something that I think works for the foreground. And you might not be able to tell the difference, but when you see it moving, in a moment you'll understand. Now, when I talked about mixing here, mixing versus chroma keying, I wanted to give a still example of this so it's very clear. Now, if we're talking about mixing that image with this image, we're going to talk about getting something that looks like this. And that, to me, kind of looks crappy. But all video mixers are equipped to do something like this. It's a simple fade from one signal to another signal. And somewhere around the middle of that cross-fading action, when you're going from one side to another, you get the two images composited, one over the other, blended like this. Now, the disadvantage of that is you don't have like the full luminous quality of either image, and it just kind of looks washed out. But a lot of the time when you're transitioning with actual video, this is one of the best tools you have because it's smooth. Well, the thing is, there's a lot of black in this image, and there's a lot of black in this image. What chroma keying is good for, or just keying in general, is saying, okay, this is my foreground image. I'm going to remove everything in the black, and then I'm going to get something that looks like this. And this is what I like about doing chip visuals, or that you don't get this kind of muddy mixing like this, but you have really crisp blacks, whites, green, whatever color you want. It's a crisp color because the generation of the image is generated from a chip, right? Like a Commodore, Nintendo, whatever. If you get close to that Nintendo and you're looking at the screen, you don't ever see like that kind of compression you get from a movie file, or you get like a JPEG image. If you're a nerd, you know what I'm talking about. I see some heads nodding, thank you. But you don't get that compression, right? It's a clean signal. So when you chroma key, you get really crisp. That black color is really crisp, or whatever color you want to key out, and you can easily composite images like this. And this is what I was talking about before. I always have two signals mixed, so I have something like this in the background, I have this in the foreground, and I mix them like this so they're composited on one another. And yeah, I'm going to show a little demo of this and talk about some of the other things when I do that demo for effects and, of course, layering. So, all right, hopefully, I'm going to adjust this real quick. All right, so there's a really great program. I don't know if you've seen it, called OpenEMU, but you got to check it out. It's a couple people. Vade is a great guy from New York. Dan Winkler, a couple other dudes are working on this. I just named my friends that I know are working on the project first, which is shitty. I don't think they do as much as some of the other dudes, but this is a really cool program. This is one of the builds that I think is up on GitHub, but it's not. It might be out by now. But as you can see on the left-hand side, it allows you to load up different consoles and play games. And at my and probably some other people's requests, they allow you now to have multiple copies of games open. But that still doesn't allow you to do anything mixing with them. You still have to do that on your own. But anyway, I'll show some examples. So that one thing I showed you before, that one I said was like a background image. Hold on. Do you see that? What's happening? See, this is why I should be using an actual Nintendo. Let me see. Let me see what's happening. Oh my gosh, the screen is so big, it's freaking me out. Hold on. Is that working? No. Try this one more time. So anyway, this is a really great program. It does work. I don't want to discredit these guys. It's something I think weird is going on with the way this is set up. But these are some ROMs that I put in basically to demo here. Let me see. View. We definitely don't want to enter full screen. Oh, there it is. So this is a bug with the resizing, it looked like. Did you see that for a minute too? Yeah. All right. Wow. As long as I move my finger around, so
excellent.
Shoot.
If you go into full screen, actually, it won't be actually trying to do like multiple resolutions.
Yeah, I don't know what's happening here. Hold on. Something else is weirder
Bottom
than this.
right.
Hold on a minute. Hold on a moment. I don't know if that's gonna. That works. Oh no? I gotta keep moving it. All right. Well, let's hope that it's gonna work in a minute in this other thing that I'm doing. Just give me 1 second here. Hold on. All right. So anyway, let me move and talk here. This is a great exercise. So this is an example of a background thing that I like to do. This is the one that you saw, I believe. Hold on. I was like, why isn't this working? Then I remembered I wasn't moving it. There we go. This is another one I wrote. This is really bad. It's cool. Ooh, ooh. All right. It just looks good because I'm changing the size of it.
New
this
strategy.
This is what it's like to do live visuals. No, so that is, let's see. So anyway, let's see. I'm going to hope that they're actually running, but it's not displaying properly. I don't know if you've ever used Quartz Composer, but this is something that I made in Quartz. Does it work? Probably not. There's not even, why is nothing working? Does this happen? You change it to 800 by 600 and nothing works? Oh, this is so bad. So anyway, this is a patch that I wrote that I'm going to release, and what this does actually is it allows you to chroma key 2 ROMs over top of each other. So basically, I wrote this as a crazy backup once when I was really paranoid. So it allows you to take OpenEMU, and OpenEMU uses something called Siphon, which allows you to share video streams between other programs. And what I wrote down here is basically a way you can kind of do soft video mixing between ROMs from any console that OpenEMU supports. And I was going to show you how to composite them, and I'm hoping it's still going to work. If I have to, I'll just turn around my laptop and unplug it from the projector. Hold on 1 minute. I don't really know what's happening. I mean, my resolution's down, but I hope it's not just because of that. All right, hold on a minute. Let me see what I can do here. There's no way this is going to work. All right, now it looks just like it did when I was planning this, so if it doesn't work now, I have no excuse. So this is a lot of pressure. Hold on. Hold on. Let's see. I'm going to come up with another, I'll come up with something else to blame it on if this doesn't work, though.
Just blame it on Pats.
Are you kidding me? Yeah. Emily, stop that sound. There's always I was fine until you started making that sound. I was doing it all right. Damn it. All right. So anyway, let's hope this actually works. I really don't know what's happening. So anyway, this is the viewer. This is what's supposed to actually be happening here. Is let's see. It'll be really funny. What this does is just both of the ROMs that are composited in here will, let's see if it actually works when I move it, as usual. Well, I'll have a lot of other, I'll just show some examples. Yeah, oh my god. So I have to actually, if I had a mouse, if I somehow could do multi-touch and move both of you, that's funny, so it only sends when I'm resizing it, and then it pauses. All right, I'm going to try to figure this out. And if this doesn't work, I'm going to show you some videos on YouTube and be really upset about myself. All right.
Love you anyway.
Thank you. I don't know. See, again, this is why you should always stick to classic hardware. This is my definite. So anyway, this is a really great piece of software. I just don't know why it's not working. All right, so I'll figure out another way to do this real quick, and I will. We're just gonna figure out another way to do this. So I was gonna show it live, but another way I can do it is do something like this. So so this is This is a ROM. One ROM here. And what I was saying is that it's always good, you know, to be able to count and beat match and things like that, and when you think about changing things in real time, for example, this is just some simple clouds, right? But some things I have built in are to change between different patterns, right? And another thing you can do is change the direction that they move. And the reason these are very simple, but the nice thing is that they can be used in real time along with changing this. It kind of has a randomized thing, and you can also then reverse the direction like this. So there's a lot of key control that you can do, as well as changing the color. So a lot of the ROMs and software that I have writing have a lot of different colors, a lot of different motion patterns, and this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about layering and composition. This is something, again, that I use mostly as a background image, where if something I use as a foreground was to be this 2-layer ROM. And if I was able to mix, this is the one I showed in the screenshot earlier, I have this layer of stars as well as this layer of background. And the background squares, the green squares, are actually just a background image. They're just one flat image, but they appear to be three-dimensional. And by changing the directions of these, you can make it appear to be slower, but if they're going opposite directions, it's faster. You can turn them like this or like this. And those things are very simple, but the idea is you can also change between different patterns for the foreground, turn the foreground and background on and off if you just want some type of more minimal star thing. I think you can change the patterns of the stars too, but this is just an emulator. So you want to try to think of, if you're writing your own software, what type of stuff here you can do to change in real time when the music's changing. And the other thing I wanted to mention, because you are running, I guess, a little late here, is that you want to think about what the mixer gives you as well. And that one Chords Composer patch that I wrote that doesn't work, unfortunately, right now, shows some mirroring examples. And you want to think about, when you're writing software, should I write something in software where I can mirror it if I can do that in hardware? And the answer is probably no, right? So think about what the mixer affords you, what type of color changing, what type of mirroring, if it can slow down in the mixer, if you can multiply the image to have multiple copies. Don't do any of that in software, because then you can do some things with the controller, like a Nintendo controller, in real time, like I do, and then the other time, the other hand, you can be hitting the mixer. So try to think of, again, if we look back at this presentation, what effects you have, what ones you get for free on your hardware. And when it comes to layering and composition, again, if you're going to be chroma keying, this is something I use in the foreground because it's much more minimal. So things that work best in the foreground are usually things with a lot of black or a lot of one color that you can remove and have other things composited behind them. And things that work best in the background are things that are larger blocks of color, slow moving, not as dynamic as things that might be in the foreground. And one other note here, before we get into this beat matching and counting thing, is that when you're changing things, you always probably think, if you start doing live visuals, that the people are going to get bored looking at what you're doing really quick. But the fact of the matter is, you programmed it, you practiced it, you hate it. But 9 times out of 10, when I look back at videos that I've done, I'm always changing things too fast. So I'm like, damn it, I change a pattern every 3 seconds. How are people even going to be following along? But when I'm doing it, I always feel like that's the right thing. So that's why I really want to kind of segue that into beat matching and counting. It's really great to look at the music, listen to the music of the people that you're performing with, as I said with the drummer example earlier. But if there's no drummer, if there's no guitar player, a lot of time in chip music, it's just like a dude pumping his fist in the Game Boy. So, welcome to 8static. No, so how are you going to know, right? If he's just dancing, if he starts and dances, welcome to 8static, and that's it, then how are you going to know? Well, that means you have to listen to the music and try to figure it out. So let me pull up an example of something real quick, and then we'll talk a little bit about this. This is music, so it should work. And guys, I think there's still audio coming up. Oh, I can't hear that good. So this is an example. I wanted to play an example of good music, people I like to work with. And this, everybody, I'm sure people know Kovacs from Sweden. Yeah, he's a great dude. Fuck him, now he does his own visuals, so I'll never be able to do visuals for him again. But no, he's a great guy. He makes amazing music. And this is his new album recently. It came out. No, I'm not going to copy it for you. You can buy it. This is Attack Vector. This is Audacity. If anything's going to crash, it's going to be this piece of shit program. So you can tell I do visuals because I open audio in Audacity. But anyway, so one thing one thing is good about this is that we don't have to be listen to this whole song to know that there's changes, right? So we can look at this, and if you've ever looked at a waveform before or something like, and I feel like probably people in here have, then you can figure out here where these changes are going to happen. And really what it is as a visualist, it's up to you to know when things are going to change. And a lot of that comes down to counting. Kovacs's music here is mostly 4/4, so you can anticipate that there are probably, you know, groups of kind of 4 drum beats arranged in patterns of 16, 32, 64, etc. And there's going to be build-ups and there's going to be breakdowns. And the thing you want to do, really, is just kind of listen. So if we start this song out, and we hear this kind of quiet part, you don't want to be going like full-on crazy, moving, flying around shit in the beginning of a song. When this happens, this is the type of thing where you want to pull in, have more flashing, more color, more strobing. And if you see Kovacs's live sets, where he curates his visuals, it's the same thing. I'm just not just making this up. But the one thing that you'll get into if you start doing visuals is if you start feeling it, and it's going well, and then all of a sudden, there's a breakdown like this. That's the time for you to really tone it down. Because as a musician, he's on stage, she's on stage, whoever's on stage, this is a part that's a lull in the music to build up energy. And I'd say keeping the musician in mind, you don't want to have full-on strobing, like anime girls' heads exploding, like during this part of the song. Because this is like building up. And you can see that coming up, the heads can start exploding. But for now, you should be taking it easy. And again, always look to the musician for cues, and if you don't, count it out. So if you start here counting, I'm not going to go through this laborious exercise, but if you've listened to dance music, you know you can count off things in 4/4. You can tell in groups of 4 usually when things are going to change. And if you've listened to the song, you can kind of get into the groove. So what I'm trying to say is be aware of these changes. And 3 or 4 minutes for a song can seem like an eternity if you're doing visuals, because you want to do something new constantly. But if you do something new constantly for every song, a few things within one song, you're going to kind of be running out of material unless you have a wealth of it by the end of one set. So it's not a bad idea if a musician, if you think of it this way, puts a lot into making one song feel one way. Why not try to use just one piece of software, or a couple pieces of software, a couple of things of software, and without a lot of different patterns and changes for one song. So that's really my advice, is not to go all out trying to come up with as much as you can for one song, but how can you change, like I showed you the visuals I do earlier, the directions of things, or the colors, or the patterns, to do subtle changes that kind of highlight the changes in the music without going overboard. And that's something I think that comes from practice. But again, counting and being aware of what the energy of the song and the musician on stage is super important. And like I said, even if you've never heard the music before, even if you never heard the music before, you can count it out and you can kind of follow along. All right, I don't know how much more I have. I don't think I have too much. Yeah, that's actually it. You can get in touch, don@no-carrier.com. That image in the corner of Mario Paint Mario with a joint in his mouth is my reminder to tell you that afterwards, the after party tonight, I'm going to be doing a digital reggae set. So if you guys are fans of Jatari, a great label out of Germany, artists all over the world, or early 1980s digital reggae, so if you have no idea what chip or digital reggae sounds like, I suggest you come to the Institute afterwards. I will be playing some music there, not doing visuals. But yeah, and please get in touch. And if you have any questions now, maybe we have 5 minutes. I don't know. Yes, good, we do. If anybody has any questions, you hit me up now, later, anything. Hey, Glenn.
Yeah, we never get to really talk about stuff because you're always like.
This is getting weird.
It's getting really weird, man. But I do have a bunch of questions, but I'll try to cut it short.
All right.
My first question is, what happens when you show up to a space and you can't set up directly at the screen, like you have to be off to the side? Can you ever compensate for having to project at kind of a trapezoidal angle?
Oh, that's a good question. So some projectors, I don't think this one has it, but some of them actually have like vertical and horizontal auto keystoning now, or you can change, so you can actually change that. So yeah, that's one good thing. Epson line of projectors like we have here, they're relatively cheap. The bulbs are only a couple $100 if they ever burn out, which is better than like 2 times that, and they're less than like usually about anywhere from $400 to $800. And if you get one of those, they have a keystoning feature. So if you do set it up to the side, you can push it over and change that. But the weird thing about that is what you usually do is you have a kind of gray like ghosting around where the original image was. So if it's really dark, you'll notice that. And that's why I'm saying like the optimal thing for projector setups is aiming the throw to be full on the right way. You don't want to do any zooming. You really don't want to do any keystoning because it's going to affect the image quality because it's all kind of faked with mirrors in there, and you'll notice the kind of ghosting. Is there any other questions? No? You can keep going. Then.
That's fine. Go for it.
Another thing I was wondering was if you said you use 3 different NESs. Do you have one where either it's just the way it's been made, or you've dropped it and something happens that you're like, this specific one works better for this kind of code or this kind of visual?
Oh, that's awesome. So what I actually do is
Not so weird, huh?
No, it's good, man. No, it's just that like we don't ever talk anymore or anything. I was weird. This is really paranoid, but if you ever had a Nintendo and you've replaced the 72-pin connector, you can actually replace the connectors so they're like new and they work with better cartridges. I actually have these flash-based cartridges, and I only use 1 cart in one of the Nintendos ever, and they're labeled. So that way, when I go abroad sometimes and I freak out because they don't have anything I have there, I know that this 1 cartridge works with this 1 Nintendo. So yeah, I mean, like anything you can do to safeguard your setup is important because, like I said, traveling, you can't always have access to hardware, retro hardware. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Cool.
Hey, if we want to start doing this on hardware, where do we learn more about that?
Oh man, there's chipmusic.org is a great resource. There is a motion graphics section there, and that's another term you can. I mean, that doesn't really cover this. But you can start there in motion graphics, or I guess if you have questions about individual hardware, they have like a Nintendo forum, a Genesis forum, and people that use those computers or those consoles usually post there. So that would be a good question. If you have general questions, like I said, you can always hit me up about this because I like talking about this stuff, as you can see, and I'd be happy to help you get started for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Do you always use Chords Composer, or was that kind of like a one-time?
I wrote that in a panic because I waited in case anything broke when I was going away. And but the Chords Composer patch I'll be releasing hopefully in the next month or so. And again, that'll allow you to work with OpenEMU. And I think there's a bug here because because this is just a MacBook Air and it's got a shitty video card and it's hooked up to the projector. But I can show you later on if you want to see what the patch looks like. But it'll allow you to take any ROM for any of those systems that OpenEMU supports and chroma key them or mix them with any other ROMs and then output it to a projector full screen. So that would be a really nice soft version of a setup if you're interested in doing that before you invest in a lot of money in hardware. Cool. Thanks.
Is there any reason why you prefer like the NES over like any other console?
Oh, I got started with the NES early on because I was like, I want to learn to program for the NES. So I taught myself to program for the NES, and it took so damn long. It's probably why I still like it. No, I don't know. I just like, I think it's a really nice, it has a lot of moving images. It has 64 moving sprites. It's got a ton of different colors. The Commodore only has 16 colors, and I don't think the palette's that pretty. I know Minus Baby would shoot me for that. But I don't like the palette of the Commodore. Nintendos are also relatively abundant and cheap. And like I said, they're relatively low resolution. They're really easy to get crisp chroma keyed images, and they're adorable. They're actually really adorable.
Just one last question.
Sure.
I just noticed in your setup that you showed in the pictures.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the 72-pin thing as well.
Yeah.
Do you find that it's easier for you to use the classic NES setup with that ejector kind of 72-pin or the top loader?
Oh, that's a great question for Nintendos. The top loaders actually. They only do RF out. I don't think Nintendo made them only do RF out. I don't think they do RCA out. And people have modded them to do RCA out, but they still give stray scan lines every like 10 or 15 scan lines. So they have a pretty shitty video output. But the thing is, if you get one of these and you put a new connector in, I actually take my power packs and I push them in, but I never push them down. And that way, when you have a lot of bass, they can actually vibrate in the slot a little without ever resetting. So that's one of the things I actually do. Because the 72-pin connectors are so tight that they will hold the cartridge in place and it'll run. You don't have to push it down. That's what's going to bend it and continue to fuck it up. So if you just keep it in there, that's good. And like I said, you know, you don't. It's not pictured here, but often I pack these in bubble wrap and put the bubble wrap underneath the consoles. And if you're closer to the stage with subwoofers like this around, because the vibrations can make a big difference. Yeah, Carl.
I have a question. If you learn to write in one console, how much time do you really have to spend where it's sort of like, oh, I know Japanese, how long does it take to learn Chinese? That's the kind of question I have. Is like, if you go to Sega Genesis, how much have you now got to start from scratch learning?
That's another really good question. So this, interestingly enough, the Nintendo, the Commodore 64, the Apple II, many of these all use 6502, which is a certain early assembly language. The nice thing about that is you can learn it once, but you have to learn the hardware specifics for each of the consoles. That's a big difference between programming. Like if you learn C++ or Java and you're doing software, say JavaScript for the web, right? It's going to be a little bit different because the standards are similar, but here you actually have to understand how each controller pinout works to get the controller data to read, the different video cards that are in each one. So it's all hardware specific once you learn the language. So I don't know, it depends how, I guess, how much time you spend on it, but I would look into something like 6502 if you're interested in retro programming, just because it is Commodore, Apple, Nintendo, Atari 2600 as well. So learning one language like that, if any, I think would be the best one, and then I would say really go with the hardware you know the best. And that's another reason why I went with the Nintendo, because if you know the Nintendo really well, when you start coding, you already know what it's capable of. You're like, oh, I know, I've seen this game, I know it can do these type of graphics. Or if you do music, it's the same thing, I think. Like if you grew up with a Commodore, you probably want to make music with a Commodore because you know all the variety of sounds that it can do. So yeah, learn the language and then go with something you know the best because you know what it's capable of.
My experience was really strong with the Apple IIe because those were in my schools.
Yeah, so 6502 would be perfect because Apple IIe uses that language and you could start from there for sure. Cool. All right. Thank you guys so much.